Hi, this is Joni McGarry. Thanks for tuning in. Last week, I had the pleasure to speak with the brilliant Aaron Day. I invited him on the show to talk to me about technocracy, the acceleration of it under the Trump administration, and to unpack for me CBDCs, stablecoins, and the Genius Act. He really delivered. He talked about these subjects in a way that was very accessible to me and very understandable. And I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. I had planned to release the episode next week, but the passage of the Genius Act compelled me to put it out there right now. It's very, very timely. So without further delay, I'd like to bring on Aaron Day, and I suggest you grab a cup of coffee or possibly something stronger and settle in for an information-packed discussion on these very critical topics. Hi, Aaron. Thanks for coming.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Aaron Day. I am currently a fellow with the Brownstein Institute and also the CEO of the Daylight Freedom Foundation, which is a nonprofit my wife and I started to focus on raising awareness about technocracy, as well as help people with help personal transformation and reclaiming free will, as well as building alternative systems outside of the technocratic state. So it's really focusing on not working within the political system, but actually starting to build parallel systems that are outside of the existing system that we have. The way I got here is somewhat of a long story, but I would like to say I've been radicalized 3 times. I was radicalized the first time I started so I've always been kind of a pro-liberty person. I actually started at an objectivist club in high school. We were just talking about high school. I was at the Indiana Academy, and so was interested in Ayn Rand, very early on.
Mm-hmm.
Then went to college. Yep. Then went to college and dropped out and started my first company in 1995. And so I had this view of capitalism. I had this view that the U.S. was a capitalist system, and
with a free market, probably
with a free market. and then I met with 150 venture capitalists and all the people on Wall Street during the .com boom. So I started this company early in the .com internet, process. And so I walked away from that realizing it's a complete crony system. There's no free market about it. It's all about relationships, but then it gets even worse than that. When you look at venture capital, just as one small example, over half of the money that goes to venture capital firms comes from public funding sources. The largest single investor in venture capital funds is the California pension system. So if you ever wondered why big tech is so woke, or why a lot of it is based in California, it's not because that's where all the smart people are. It actually turns out that this pension fund would put terms and conditions that say things like, hey, we'll invest $100 million in your venture capital fund, but you can only invest in companies that are within a 30-mile radius of Silicon Valley. And they wanted to keep it captive to California. So anyway, I could go down that for a long time, but needless to say, that was my first radicalization.
I would have thought it was the federal government, but that's very interesting. Go on.
No, it's pension funds of all kinds, and also university endowments. And so, of course, we know now Harvard and Yale and everybody else have, in some cases, tens of billions of dollars or more in these endowments. And so they invest also in a lot of these funds. And this is where you get the social agenda. They actually push this kind of agenda. So that was eye-opening to me 30 years ago. Then the second time I was radicalized was I started a healthcare company to reward employees for losing weight and improving their health. And essentially what we were doing is we were taking the healthcare cost savings that the employer was seeing in reduced medical claims and using that to fund the incentives. And so this was a situation where we were actually improving the health of the employees, lowering the health insurance costs, and we created a profitable business. We had clients in 43 states.
Sounds like a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, profitable and growing. And then that was destroyed by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and Attorney General Eric Holder. And in this case, my company wasn't targeted at all. I don't think any of the people involved knew who I was or knew who my company was. This was just collateral damage from basically Obamacare said we were rewarding people for actually losing weight. So it was based on measured success. And they basically said, well, you can't use insurance money for that now. You could basically only reward people now for participating in a program. They participation trophied essentially my business model. So basically, if you want to enroll in a gym or you want to enroll in a weight loss program, you can use health insurance dollars, pre-tax dollars for that, but you can't actually reward people for hitting measured results, which destroyed the fundamental basis of why I started the company. Then Dodd-Frank.
It also destroys any utility of the program to advance the goal of health.
Exactly. Yes.
So
which is, by the way,
than that.
Which is how most of healthcare is actually structured. It was phenomenal to me when we were in there selling. I mean, I was in there like, well, here's the ROI, and here's here are the health outcomes, and people in the medical community are not even used to looking at things in terms of effectiveness, relative to the amount spent. It was eye-opening to me. But in any event, Dodd-Frank kicked in, and so we were rewarding the participants in our program by giving them quarterly rewards. And
for somebody who might not know, say a little bit about what Dodd-Frank is.
Dodd-Frank it's financial regulation that was put in place. I mean, again, it's one of these things where it's stated that it's put in place to protect the consumer, but inevitably it only protects the large financial institutions. And in this case with Dodd-Frank, so we were rewarding the participants in our program by either giving them reusable debit cards or checks every quarter, or using points that could be redeemed for merchandise. And Dodd-Frank imposed new fees. So if you were a bank with more than $10 billion in assets, they added all of these new fees. And so the partner that we were working with immediately had to get out of the arrangement. So we had clients that had been working with us for 3-4 years where they were having reloadable debit cards, and now all of a sudden they were able to use this kind of force majeure to get out of the contract. And so now we were sitting here left with tens of thousands of participants across the country where we had no ability to actually technically give them money. And then the thing with Eric Holder, we used a check writing service to pay out checks because it's not very efficient to do internally. And we used a company that had been in business for 30 years. And so they would aggregate money from all of their customers into one account, and then they would efficiently write checks off of that one account. Well, Eric Holder decided to go after offshore gaming, and then claimed that the check writing service that we were using, one of their clients was involved in offshore gaming. So they seized everyone's account, froze everyone's money. So we bounced checks, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of checks, largely to nurses all over the country. And we weren't even given the ability to provide additional funding to make the checks good. We were presumed guilty. We had to spend tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and months just to get our money back. So anyway, this destroyed that. And so this second radicalization to me was, I came to the assumption that government is just incompetent. And then I got heavily involved in activism, moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project, was the chair of the Free State Project, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's a movement to get 20,000 people to move to New Hampshire and make New Hampshire essentially the beacon of liberty on earth. So that was part of that. Ran a bunch of political organizations, as did my wife, to recruit candidates and get people elected to office. We got, between us, probably 150 people elected locally, even ran for office, myself in a variety of different capacities. And long story short, I came to the conclusion that politics it's not about incompetence, it's actually malice. And it actually operates on kind of what I'll call an organized incompetence model, where you have few people at the top pulling the strings, and then most of the people that are involved in government are just mindlessly following and thinking that they're actually doing the right thing, which makes it an even more difficult situation to fix. And so the ultimate, so I was involved heavily in politics for a long time. My stepmother was involved in politics. She started out in Florida, ended up becoming the co-chair of the RNC, was Trump's ambassador to Costa Rica. So I've seen the political process up front for 30 years. I've seen how all of that works. So when I say I've abandoned all hope, it's not, I've seen it, I've experienced it directly, and then I've seen it for 3 decades. And when you have a population where only 2/3 of Americans can identify the 3 branches of government, only 28% of 8th graders now have a passing grade in civics. We have a voter base that's uneducated.
You said 2/3. I'm surprised it's that high, and I'm surprised we still have civics. So
well, I've seen stats that say 2/3 can't identify, and then I've seen other stats. So there are different stats out there. But in general, one of the things that I learned doing politics is that you can buy databases of voter information where you can get 500 data points on every voter in the U.S. I mean, I can tell you, I had everybody in New Hampshire. I could tell you their net worth, where they stand from 0 to 100 on 20 different political issues, what
Wow.
magazine subscriptions they have. And so largely the elections are controlled by the political parties and whoever's able to use AI to use targeting of data to get people elected. And of course, the candidates themselves, we don't really get choices. I mean, we have the illusion of choice, but just as RFK saw in the Democrat Party and has happened time and time again in the Republican Party, it's the establishment candidates that are the only ones that are given access to either the resources or even the platform to become candidates themselves. And so the entire process, and then you add the deep state and everything else, it's kind of unworkable. But so I exited politics in 2018 and, wanted to pursue solutions that might actually work. So just kind of adopting an exit and build strategy. So I stopped using a personal bank account and started living on crypto. Gold and silver is just one part of it. But then started to investigate how to use the same technology behind crypto to get rid of third parties in other areas like the stock market. And, basically any category where you have a centralized third party is something that can be replaced by, decentralized technology where there is no third party.
Let me just back up a second. Like when you said you stopped using a bank account, most people can't get their mind around why anyone would do that, right? So what's the benefit to the person and how it's even possible to live without a bank account?
I actually did it out of a principled stance of looking at this. We see a lot of people, the Ron Paul revolution and everything else, where people talk about ending the Fed and stopping these wars and stopping central bank tyranny. Well, the actual way to do that is to stop using the dollar. And you can do that now. There's nothing stopping you. And obviously, since Ron Paul ran for president, I'm going to be going to his 90th birthday party here in a few weeks. But since he ran for president, the Federal Reserve, the debt has doubled. The Federal Reserve has only gotten more powerful. We can't even get an audit of the Federal Reserve, let alone ending the Federal Reserve. So I decided that rather than participate in these rigged elections, I'm going to stop using the money that's causing this tyranny all over the world. And to that point, a lot of people aren't aware of this. I mean, the dollar's lost 99% of its value since 1913. It's actually lost 11% of its value this year, something like 26% of its value just since COVID. So the purchasing power of the dollar has been eroding at a massive, massive pace, which, by the way, is what happens with every government-issued fiat currency in human history.
It always goes to zero, but everyone thinks that we're different.
Everyone thinks that we're different. The average fiat currency only lasts 27 years. But even though the average length, duration, and lifespan for a global reserve currency, if you look at the 5 previous reserve currencies, the British pound and Spain and all these other things, they only lasted about 85 years. And so we're well past due on that. And there are 7 main reasons that fiat currencies fail, and we're actually flashing bright red on all 7 of those reasons. It's not even just usually something fails for 1 or 2 of the reasons. We actually have all of it. Government corruption, excess military spending, competition, technology. I mean, you name it. So we aren't different. We're actually in many ways objectively worse.
Yeah.
And so, but the one thing is, if doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is insanity, why are we trying fiat currency again? Everybody then says, well, is it going to be BRICS next? Are we going to move here? And fiat currency really is kind of the source of the boom and bust cycle of nation states. So it seems to me that, we should be looking for money that is separate from state, because it is that debt-based state money that funds all of these wars and funds all of the poverty and tyranny around the world. And so that's why I started using crypto. And I'm in New Hampshire where, I learned about Bitcoin in 2012. There's a huge community here that has been involved in cryptocurrency, which I'll come back to my third radicalization, which is, so exited politics and was kind of going on a, personal transformation mission on the one hand, and really focusing on working on these alternative solutions. And then COVID hit, which I wasn't surprised about COVID. My wife actually started a vaccine choice group in 2006. So we weren't.
Oh, so you've been a medical freedom person for pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID.
Well, my
wife was more so even than I was. And so, so she's like an OG on this. So we never had any, there was no question of whether we were going to take the vaccine. So that wasn't, even COVID itself wasn't a surprise to me based on what was going on in 2019. I mean, we were seeing the beginnings of the financial collapse. The Federal Reserve was opening the discount window and things that people don't even think about that were happening in September and October. And I was sitting there at the time saying, we're about to head towards an economic collapse, and then boom, COVID.
Well, and most people, including, I certainly don't have a big handle on it, but most people don't even understand the mechanism of those things, much less they're not aware of it because the mainstream media is not reporting it in a way that would educate the population. So in order to even understand that or see it, you had to have your eyes open and paying attention to it. And most citizens don't have either of those tools.
No, they don't have those tools. And unfortunately, they're explicitly not taught these things. You're not taught these things in school.
Not at all.
When you're taught fiscal responsibility is, are you doing arithmetic correctly with your bank account? But they don't talk about the fact that the underlying monetary system itself is a Ponzi scheme.
Right.
And that the Federal Reserve is this private cartel of banks.
And we don't even know, it's not even public who owns the Federal Reserve. Most people think the Federal Reserve is a federal government agency of some sort, and they don't know how money is made. And we use money every single day. It's really quite astounding all the time.
We use money every single day, and it's lost, as I said, 99% of its value. We are at that point of collapse. But on top of that, which I've learned is, so I got radicalized when I saw not COVID, but when I saw that friends of mine that are at the intersection of crypto and liberty here in New Hampshire were being targeted by the federal government. Jeremy Kauffman started a company called Library, which was a decentralized version of YouTube, and the SEC went after him. And he actually, I won't get into the details of it, but if you were going to go after someone based on what looked like a scam for investing, his was not that. He was selling tokens that you actually use in the platform to post content. He wasn't selling tokens for speculative appreciation, but he was targeted because he built a platform that was censorship resistant. And that was something the government didn't want, particularly in the time of COVID. Then another friend of mine, Ian Freeman, who I learned about the Free State Project from, he got involved in Bitcoin in 2010, and he actually introduced Roger Ver, which that's a different story. But he had a syndicated radio show called Free Talk Live, which still exists all over the United States, and he's been promoting liberty. He and his business partner are probably responsible for more than 10% of the people moving to the Free State Project.
Wow.
And so he was operating ATMs, and he was selling people Bitcoin for cash. And he got an opinion letter from a lawyer saying he didn't need a money transmitter law. And they literally entrapped him. They had people planted inside of his organization, tried to get him on a whole variety of things. He was raided by 5 different federal government departments with, a Bearcat, which is this military police vehicle, and everything else. And, in the end, he's now in prison for 8 years for what they're saying is, basically selling Bitcoin without a license. And then they also conspiracy to commit money laundering, because they dropped the money laundering charge, and then they held him responsible for what some of his clients did, which imagine if, JP Morgan, why isn't Jamie Dimon in prison for being Jeffrey Epstein's banker? But of course, I guess he didn't commit any crimes either. So I guess maybe that's the reason based on the DOJ.
Based on the latest, right? Yeah.
Yeah, based on the latest.
And in a situation like the one you were describing, I mean, you personally know this man, their business model. And so when you have an inside seat to that, it's not like the average person reading the paper about it who thinks, well, they must be guilty, that there must have been something there for a raid to happen. And I think that's part of the duplicitous nature of the world we live in. And that's why it's so easy to lead the public, because you can sensationalize something like that and they won't pay attention to the fact that maybe the due process wasn't even there to begin with.
Yeah, there was no due process, and both of these guys, Jeremy and Ian, were targeted because of their political beliefs. These are people that were both. I mean, Ian's whole thing is anti-violence and using cryptocurrency to spread voluntary trade and to stop war. And he was part of something called Bitcoin Not Bombs very early on. Started a Bitcoin embassy here in New Hampshire, helped onboard merchants, and so I mean, this is a guy who's messaging. I mean, how he shouldn't be targeted for this. He should be celebrated for this. And that's why, now I'm not to say, he did some political activism that a lot of people don't agree with, but that's independent of.
But you should be able to do political activism that people don't agree with. You should be able to do that freely.
You should. So when I started researching, so why are they targeting these people? And that's when I did a deep dive on CBDCs. And became horrified by what I found out, which is that the reason that they were targeting these guys, Ian and then Roger Ver in particular, who I'll probably get to if we have time,
sure,
was that Biden signed an executive order in March of 2022, and this executive order had two components to it. One was authorizing the U.S. to officially pursue a CBDC. Now, I mean, the joke about that is we've actually been working on a CBDC since 2018, but I guess this was just the first executive order that put it in writing. And the other part of the executive order said that we're going to use a whole of government approach to cracking down on cryptocurrency. Well, so a central bank digital currency is a digital dollar that can be programmed, tracked, and censored centrally.
And can only be issued by a central bank.
Well, it can only be issued by a central bank, but there are actually some nuances on that, which I've subsequently learned a lot about, even the technical details about how our current system works. But the scary part about it is that, a CBDC is essentially the basis of technocracy and a digital control system. Once you can program and track money at that granular of a level, then you can add social credit systems and vaccine passports and everything else. And so to me, is everything all right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question about that, just to pull the camera back a little bit. When you say it's programmable money, I know what you mean, but some people might not know what you mean. What is a currency that's programmable, and why is that a bad thing?
Well, the interesting thing is our money. So what I ended up learning through all this is that we already have a CBDC. And so now we're actually just dealing with layers of this. But literally when I say programmable money, they can basically write lines of code that say you can only use money to buy certain products at certain times from certain retailers or in certain businesses based on whatever factor they determine, whether it's your social credit score or whatever it happens to be.
And they can do that when you say it's at a granular level. They have the technology to do it for every single individual and then observe what that individual does in the world. So if you post something that they don't like, maybe, and when this is full swing, you might not be able to take the trip to see your family in Florida, or if you've used up too many carbon credits or something like that. I'm just trying to drive this home to somebody who doesn't have any is not conversant in this at all.
Well, yeah, and to take a step back, the ultimate end goal here is to implement a global technocracy. And actually, this is the thing that I'm trying to educate people on the most, because people, when they hear the word technocracy, a lot of people confuse it with technology. And so they think, oh, technology, there's nothing wrong with technology. Technology is great. Technology makes things more efficient. Technocracy is actually a political movement. And the idea behind the political movement is that you don't have any individual rights. You don't have property rights. The idea behind it is humanity is going to wipe itself out because we're going to use up all of the CO2 on the planet and everything else. And the only way that we can save humanity is by having elites pick scientists and engineers to make decisions for everyone. And at the basis of technocracy as a political system is that the currency itself goes from being a price-based system that we're familiar with today, where we buy and sell things with dollars or whatever your currency is, to one that's entirely based on energy credits. And so this is the technocracy movement, and it started in the 1930s. And so when I'm going to be putting out a lot more content about this, and I share a lot of videos, people will be shocked when they see these people meeting. I mean, they got to the point where it almost looks like, a Nazi rally. They'd wear suits. They all would wear the same color of gray, called Technocracy gray, to the point where GM actually had the color so that you could buy GM cars with Technocracy gray. And so they were very aggressively pushing this. Elon Musk's grandfather was the head of the Technocracy Party in Canada.
Yeah.
And it kind of had some internal issues and fell apart for a bit, but it was really revived in the early 1970s with David Rockefeller and Brzezinski when they started the Trilateral Commission. So they essentially kind of revived technocracy, and then they influenced the UN, the United Nations, to kind of start pushing a technocratic agenda in 1974 with something called the New International Economic Order, which is actually the basis of what we now have with the UN Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so technocracy is a political movement. It is a global movement. And it's a movement that says, we are going to use this energy credit-based monetary system as the control system for all human behavior. And then on top of that, then we're going to have social credit systems. So as to your point, you're only going to be able to live in 15-minute cities. You're going to define everything. If you look at Agenda 2030, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals regulate everything in the world, all of the assets of the world, the land, the air, the sea, where you live, where you work, the kinds of language and pronouns you can use. Everything is regulated from the top down, and it's controlled digitally with energy credits as kind of the basis of this. And so for people that aren't familiar with this, I have a lot of videos on this because it may sound far-fetched, but there's something called a Doconomy MasterCard. And this is an actual credit card that people started signing up for in 2019.
Spell that. What, D-O, like instead of economy, Doconomy, like D-O-conomy.
Yeah, D-O-C-O-N-O-M-Y.
Okay.
And I've got a video. You can actually go into YouTube and type Doconomy MasterCard. You can see their own video because in their own words, their marketing video for this, it's like a couple of minutes long. It looks like the ad for a Black Mirror episode, but it's not. People are actually signing up for a credit
voluntarily
card.
To do this.
Voluntarily, that tracks your carbon use. And then when you hit a certain threshold, it shuts off the card. And they're actually selling it as, oh, well, we need to move away from consumerism. And now we need to become, aware of the fact that we're facing an existential crisis. And so here's how you can help with your carbon blueprint. And so footprint. So people actually signed up for this. But when you look at it, you can go to Google MasterCard Green initiatives, and you'll find they have 150 partner companies from BMW to all, WEF international large corporations that have been doing this, that slowly over the last decade have started to track carbon behind the scenes and track that to financial transactions. And so the technocratic agenda, they're actually near the end game. And we're sitting here and people are looking at it as, oh, Elon Musk is getting involved with government and so is Peter Thiel. They're going to make it more efficient. They are explicitly pushing a technocratic agenda.
Let me jump in for 1 second on the Agenda 2030 and the Agenda 21, the UN agenda thing. When you talk about it being a top-down movement, the reading I have done, which I find very insidious and alarming, is that it is what you said, but it's also implemented locally. So that I happen to live in a town that is implementing those things, but not in a transparent way. It seems like local initiatives in tracking our sustainability in our redevelopment corporation, but it's all being done locally through these cities and through networks of mayors as well. So it's a very insidious agenda where people are just not aware of it. So it's not like somebody's coming in from the WEF to your town telling you what to do. They're onboarding all the people and bureaucrats who are implementing these policies in the name of we're saving the planet. And so I think that's what makes it even more dangerous. And it's also hard to argue that, consumerism, probably a good thing to put a brake on it. And yes, we should be good stewards of the environment. But what I'm hearing you say, and what I happen to believe too, is that it's not being used because these people who are doing it really believe there's an existential crisis. To me, and it's an excuse to control people and get them to do what they want, to do what's not in their best interests in the name of the greater good. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah, they've explicitly stated. I agree that consumerism is not ideal, but the whole carbon credit thing is completely and totally manufactured, and it was actually manufactured by a group called the Club of Rome, who's been putting out information about that, where they explicitly state we need something like this to push our agenda.
Right.
So they have been manufacturing climate hysteria because what's possible. We don't really. The problem with technocrats is they think that they know everything, and the reality is none of us really know anything. But in the grand scale of things, what we know versus what we don't know is a pretty small thing. But I mean, in terms of different types of and forms of energy, I mean, the idea that we're going to run out of energy. Well, we're going to run out of energy if we don't allow for experimentation and if we don't allow for new discovery. But the idea that we're going to tie everything to carbon, but then when you dig deeper, the same people that are pushing this idea of carbon credits are behind the scenes buying up forests and jumping ahead of the curve so that they can own the carbon credits, so that they can get, if you think about a currency being distributed, they're already lining up to own it before the policy shift even changes. And so this is why, these are the same elite that, take their fleet of private jets and fly into Davos and then lecture everybody about carbon credits. None of it has ever been about carbon credits at all. It's about top-down control. And we know that problem, reaction, solution works. We know that if you create
every time it works.
Every time you either create a problem or a problem exists on its own. And then fear is usually the reaction. And then people, when they're in a fearful state, will take a prepackaged solution. And that's exactly what UN Agenda 2030 and the WEF is all about. I think that's what Event 201 and COVID was all about.
Oh, for sure. It was astounding how everyone fell in line and how they learned so little. I mean, they, capital THEY, they learned a lot from what the public would do. We taught them how compliant we were, but people didn't learn that this is going to happen again, and they're going to react the same way. And so and the climate existential threat is an even more powerful cudgel than a virus, I think, which make this so dangerous.
It's created nothing but anxiety amongst young people who actually believe that they themselves are causing, the death of the planet. That they've been instilling that.
Oh, and I know people who aren't going to have children because of climate change, and that's, I think, a very intended consequence of this.
It's absolutely deliberate. And evil. It's again, the fact that people sign up for this credit card, this Doconomy credit card, is a testament to the fact that this kind of programming has worked. And it's been coordinated, again, for decades. You can look at the Club of Rome and the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group and a handful of other groups. And these are interconnected groups of multinational corporations, leaders in academia, media, and so forth that are pushing coordinated narratives. And they've been doing it for a long time. And we're sitting here saying, oh, well, maybe this was just a fluke, or maybe these are a few bad actors. And it turns out one of the things that I like to do is I like to study, when I look at something like COVID, I then go, all right, what's the entire history of public health? And then once you study the history of public health, you realize it's a death cult that's been pushing a eugenics movement. It's not actually about public health. And this happens when well, how about the CIA or the FBI? People will say, well, it's just gotten corrupted. Well, when you look at the history of these organizations, they were never not corrupt. The FBI started out as a blackmail operation where the head of it was himself being blackmailed by the mafia. This is actually the genesis of the FBI. But then when you go down deeper, you're like, oh, well, there have been multiple TV shows, mostly on CBS, where they all glorify you're wearing suits and these are the good guys and these are the white hats fighting crime. That's actually never been the case. And so I like to get to the root of where all of these things come from. And I've never been pleasantly surprised.
Well, and let me just say that, like, in your research, it sounds like you go to original source documents, so that when people say, oh, Agenda 21 or this or that, and it can't be true, it's all there in black and white, published by these organizations or in their documented history, that these things actually exist. It's not conjecture.
Yeah, they don't hide it. It's all original source material. And the thing is, they don't hide it because they don't think we can do anything about it. They don't think we will do anything about it.
So let's pivot to that. They don't think we'll do anything about it. But it sounds like you're trying to do something about it by educating the public and taking your own measures to remove yourself from this system and create your own liberty and a way to go forward without being under this tyranny. Did I phrase that right?
Yeah, that's an excellent way of phrasing it. And that's what I've been trying to do. And it's an uphill battle. I'll give you an example. So I actually ran for president, and I ran as a Republican because I'm in New Hampshire. So I said I exited politics in 2018, and I did.
And then you ran for president.
And then I ran for president. I did run for Senate. That's a whole other story. But every time I've run to affect the outcome, not to win, which I've been successful at. And then I've gotten into a lot of trouble for that. But in any event, I got 17,000 votes. I cost Kelly Ayotte her U.S. Senate seat. And so I'm like, well, hey, look, I'm in New Hampshire. I've got this big liberty community that supported me. I've gotten a lot of votes. 17,000 votes in a New Hampshire presidential primary can make or break whoever wins. And so I thought, here's an opportunity to raise awareness around this CBDC issue. So I had already written my book, The Final Countdown. And so I gave it to Vivek Ramaswamy. And he actually read it, and he and I had 3 conversations about it. And I was actually talking to him about, maybe I'll endorse you if you sign my anti-CBDC pledge. He ended up dropping out in Iowa, but he pushed Trump to come out against CBDCs the day before the New Hampshire primary because I hounded him on this issue, but on top of that, the liberty community in New Hampshire in general, I mean, he was still in a contested primary with Nikki Haley. And so this is something that might have, helped push him over the top. And so I've had all these people like congratulate me. Oh, you must be relieved now that we don't have that Trump has reversed Biden's executive order and said we're not going to have a CBDC.
And he did that by executive order.
Executive order.
Okay.
The problem is that technocracy has accelerated more under Trump in the last 6 months than under Biden in the last 4 years.
And this is very interesting, and I want to get into this because it's what I think happens is the party that it has to be the right that brings this in, because otherwise the right would be squawking about it. So I'm very interested in your take that this has accelerated more under Trump. So go on.
So I can take this from a couple of different perspectives. And so people have been very concerned about digital IDs for a long time. And when it's the WEF and Klaus Schwab talking about it, people are protesting. Well, Real ID is something that was pushed by George W. Bush in 2005 as a reaction to 9/11. And it's been 20 years and they haven't been able to get it implemented, right? It's pushed back. Some people have already signed up for it, but it was optional and they kept on moving the dates. Well, Trump gets elected, Kristi Noem gets into this position, and now they've passed Real ID. Well, Real ID is already digital in 8 states with
Tell
more
us the
states.
difference between Real ID and a regular ID. What's the difference?
Well, the Real ID is it's more information that is tracked to your identity. So when you actually go through a Real ID, there's a more rigorous process. You have to provide your social security card. You have to provide your birth certificate. You have to provide proof of residency and all of this other information. And then there's other data that is then tied into the Real ID. And of course, the government has all of this information in a database, but the Real ID itself it's in physical form. But in 8 states already, it's in digital form so that it's now connected to a Google Wallet or even an Apple Wallet. But what should be alarming about this is, so again, we have a digital ID in 8 states, and it happened. And what did they use as the reason for it? Well, they're using, we need this eventually for voter integrity. We need to use this for illegal immigration. And, this happens every time. So people don't think through the consequences of this. Even if you agree with what you think the purpose of it is under Trump, are you going to feel that same way? Because you're never going to reverse these things. So when the next person is in charge, what do you think the chances are that you're going to end up being the target? It's not going to be about illegal immigration. It's because you own a firearm or you spoke out about medical freedom, right? That's because this is always how it happens. And so that's passed. And then more alarmingly, when you look at technocracy, the biggest proponents of it and the most effective are Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. Peter Thiel is the co-founder of Palantir, which is an outright frightening company if you research what they're involved in. I mean, they use AI and technology. They have clients all over the world. They work with governments. They work with the CIA. They work with local law enforcement. I mean, at the local level, they do predictive crime. So kind of like the movie Minority Report.
Yes, and my understanding was that part of the intel, now whether this is true or not, but part of the intel that led to the strikes in Iran was predictive intel from Palantir.
That's my understanding as well, and they've done similar things in Gaza, and then they've actually been used to stop right-wing movements in Europe. And you can see their CEO, Alex Karp, their YouTube videos. Again, all of this is primary source. Nobody hides this stuff. And so this is the organization that Trump has just brought in to build a database of American citizens. And when Elon Musk was in charge of Doge, they gave Palantir access to our IRS records. And so now the way to look at this is, what Palantir is going to do is they're going to connect all of the data on all U.S. citizens from all of the different databases in the federal government, and then that's going to be tied into your Real ID, which is digital in 8 states and growing. So again, and I'm not saying, because I don't believe in voting at this point. I don't think we can vote our way out. We 100% have to exit and build. But Harris would have been incompetent. She would not have been able to actually get this implemented. Just like Biden was great at lawfare with crypto, but he was not able to make any progress at actually rolling out a CBDC. So we have a digital ID that's now being tied into an AI surveillance system through Palantir. And Palantir, I mean, you can dig into Peter Thiel's background, but this is a guy who has a pretty dark philosophy And his personality and his behavior leave something to be desired. So he was outed as being gay by a publication called Gawker,
Right.
an online publication called Gawker. And so he got really angry about it. And so what he decided to do was to bankrupt them by funding. Hulk Hogan was involved in some sex tape. So he funded Hulk Hogan to basically sue and bankrupt Gawker. And they were successful at it. He did it all behind the scenes. Well, so what a lot of people, so this shows you what kind of person that he is. And if you see him interviewed, I mean, he's not necessarily the greatest interviewer, but when you look at his political views, he's heavily influenced by a guy named Curtis Yarvin, who Curtis Yarvin is essentially the Yuval Noah Harari of the right. He's pushing technocracy. He's actually pushing what he calls neo-monarchy. His belief is that democracy is bad and that essentially we need to have either a monarch or a CEO that's installed that has top-down control, and he's pushing technocracy. Well, Yarvin is a huge influence on three people that are noteworthy: Thiel, J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk. And to the point when Musk, this came out in the New York Times 3 or 4 days ago, Musk consulted Curtis Yarvin before starting America's Party. Musk is absolutely a technocrat. His grandfather was a technocrat, which doesn't mean he's a technocrat, except he hasn't deleted the tweets. He's tweeted 3 different occasions on how he wants to build a technocracy on Mars, and now he's being advised by Curtis Yarvin, who's pushing neo-monarchy and technocracy. And so Peter Thiel's pulling the strings in a lot of ways. Not only is Palantir now a huge defense contractor involved in all of this surveillance and now building this database on all Americans, but he was J.D. Vance worked for Peter Thiel, Peter Thiel, and then Peter Thiel invested in J.D. Vance's investment fund. Then Peter Thiel was the largest investor, largest donor to J.D. Vance's Senate campaign, and Thiel is responsible for introducing J.D. Vance to Trump. So J.D. Vance is Peter Thiel's guy, and J.D. Vance has also talked about being heavily influenced and has retweeted Curtis Yarvin. Peter Thiel has invested in Curtis Yarvin's enterprises. So I'm not speculating about whether or not we have technocrats that have major control or influence on what's going on. It's a matter of fact. So now we have AI surveillance database, we have digital ID. The worst is, though, in my area, which is CBDCs, which is they've passed this, what's called the Genius Act in the Senate. There's a similar bill going through the House called the Stable Act. And if you remember, Trump was called himself a stable genius.
Stable genius, right? Yeah, he said he was. You couldn't make all this stuff up. What is the Genius Act, or the Genius Act, right? What is it?
Yeah. So the Genius Act is this. So think about it. So a CBDC is essentially a digital dollar that can be programmed and controlled. Whether it's issued by the central bank actually doesn't matter, because it turns out the large banks own the Federal Reserve. So the threat here isn't whether Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, is issuing the token. You have the same problems if it's issued by Jamie Dimon at Citibank. In fact, when you look at it, this is one of the things I found. I talked to Ted Cruz about this. He was trying to put in a bill, anti-CBDC bill, trying to claim that he's worried that the Federal Reserve was going to preemptively create a CBDC, and he was trying to protect surveillance against American citizens. All of the surveillance that goes on regarding financial transactions comes from Congress. The Federal Reserve is not going out of their way to add cost and add compliance and add all of this other stuff. Everything from the Patriot Act to the Bank Secrecy Act to stuff under the CARES Act. There are 13 different programs. Our financial transactions are already tracked. You have NSA bulk data collection. You have the IRS using AI working with banks to collect your financial information.
Well, and you can't move a certain amount of money without alerting the feds. There are all sorts of rules in place that prevent you from having any privacy with your transactions or transacting as you please. So that's already happening.
There's something called a suspicious activity report. And so anybody who moves more than $10,000 in a single transaction, a report is immediately filed with the Treasury Department. But here's the thing, related to this idea of technocracy and more control under Trump, about 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, the Treasury Department issued a memo that said now for 30 zip codes, specific zip codes in California and Texas, we're going to remove the threshold from $10,000 to $200. So now if you're in these zip codes in California and Texas and you do just a $200 transaction, a report is filed with the Treasury Department.
And that's in the name of preventing cartel activity, or it could be in the name of catching illegal immigrants. All of the things that speak to the people who support this administration, the issues on which they voted are used as cover to trial these programs. Is that would be how you see it?
That's how I would see it. But the important thing for people listening to understand is that our money is already digital. Our money is 96% digital anyway. So they're able to do this with a memo. There was nothing, Congress didn't have to pass a law. No new technology was required. They already have the ability to do this kind of reporting today. That should be alarming to people. But I'll give you another one. People are excited when RFK says, well, we're not going to allow food stamps to be used to buy sugary drinks.
Now think about that.
You may like that. You may like that idea conceptually, but what does that mean? Okay, well, how do food stamps work? Well, food stamps are essentially debit cards that are issued at the state level. The largest technology provider is JP Morgan Chase. So what are they doing? They're adding another layer of granularity where now they can, at the line item, restrict the purchasing of certain products. Well, you may like that if it's sugary drinks under Medicaid, but you're not going to like it if the next time around it's you have to buy bug protein and can't buy red meat.
So it's a programmable credit card. It's programmable money already in use. And that's a really good point. I wasn't really thinking about how would they implement that.
Well, they already have. If you have a health savings account or an HRA, those are digital programmable money. Health savings account is money you can only spend for a predetermined list of healthcare expenses at a certain merchant list. And in fact, they've even shut off when you can buy these things. So my conclusion is we already have a central bank digital currency because to start, the way money is created is the government goes to the Federal Reserve, issues an IOU, and then the Federal Reserve they don't print the money. They create it in a database. It's actually an Oracle database, to be more specific. So when the government is writing checks and paying its bills, they're paying it out of an account at the Federal Reserve that's in an Oracle database where the money was just created by pressing a button. That is by definition a central bank digital currency. We also have commercial bank digital currencies. So your bank then prints money out of thin air in their computer system, which may be an Oracle database or a Microsoft database, and it's backed by the reserves that they have in the Oracle database at the Federal Reserve. So our money's already digital. It's already programmable. It's already censorable. And when you look at a lot of the censorship and debanking that happened, that also didn't happen because of the Federal Reserve. And in many cases, didn't happen because of Congress either. When Melania Trump, Barron Trump, Dr. Joseph Mercola, Kanye West, and others were debanked, they were debanked based on policies by the bank itself. It had nothing to do with Congress and had nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. So all of these entities, the commercial banks, the Federal Reserve, and Congress, those are working in harmony to do financial surveillance and to push things forward, which is why what I've been advocating for, to your original question is, well, why did you stop using a bank account? I stopped using a bank account. I stopped using the dollar because the dollar is what becomes the CBDC. The dollar is already surveillance money, but it's going to become highly programmable surveillance money. And this Genius Act, what they're doing is stable coins have become very popular in crypto.
What is a stable coin?
So the difficulty with crypto, with Bitcoin and all these other cryptocurrencies is the price is very volatile. So if you're a merchant or you're trying to do business, you can't have something that's up 40% one day, down 60% the other. So a couple of private companies came up with the idea of creating a stable coin, which is where you have one digital coin that represents $1 worth of value. And so
is it always $1 or is it a piece of gold? Like, is it tied to something else or it's tied to a currency?
It's tied to a currency. Well, so the idea is if you're one of the issuers of these stable coins, you have a whole bunch of assets and you maybe have more assets than you need to make sure that you can maintain the peg of one coin equaling $1. So that's essentially the concept. And so there are two big companies that do this, Tether and USDC. Tether is by far the largest. And there are issues with these companies. Like Tether's never been able to pass an audit. I'm not pushing. There are other issues with this, but Tether is an example. Part of what backs the assets that back their coin, they have 100,000 Bitcoin and they have some massive tons and tons and tons of gold.
Okay.
And that is what's partially backing their stablecoin. Well, the Trump administration comes in and says, now these stablecoins are really popular, and I'll tell you how popular. Last year, there was $27 trillion worth of financial transactions done using stablecoins. It's more than Visa. And based on the growth rate, by 2030, there will be more stablecoin transactions than Visa, MasterCard, and direct deposit combined. So these stablecoins are already popular. They're not as popular in the US, but they're popular anybody outside of the US because it's really expensive. You know, depending on which country you're in, your country may not be able to get a hold of dollars. You may not be able to get a bank account. The transaction fees are really high. If you're doing transactions across the border, it's really expensive and really time consuming and a lot of compliance work and paperwork and everything else. So these stable coins are popular as a private solution. Well, so the Trump administration came in and said, well, look, we have a problem, which is we want to maintain the dollar as the global reserve currency. And then we have this other problem, which is we're apparently not going to rein in spending at all. In fact, we apparently are going to increase the debt. We're going to add $2.5 trillion a year, at least for the next 2 years.
And that would be the big, beautiful bill.
The one big, beautiful bill. And here's the thing. So no one wants to buy our debt. China has said our debt has been downgraded again. China has said ditch the dollar. So they need a way to sell treasuries to fund this one big government. And so what they came up with, the genius idea is they take these stable coins that people are using, where again, the coin is attached to the value of the dollar, one coin equals $1, and they put it under control of Congress and the Federal Reserve. So all of the financial surveillance that we have with our current system and all of the regulation of the Federal Reserve, that now is going to apply to stable coins.
So what they've done is they've essentially taken a currency or a manner of trading that was private and issued by private companies, and they have sort of nationalized it. They've sort of taken it under the wing of the government now. They don't own it, but now they can surveil it.
Yeah, they don't own it, but they can surveil it. And I'll do an article on this because it's interesting. Before 1970, there was no financial surveillance at all. There was no, if you set up a bank account now, you have to go in and there's all this know your customer and you have to give biometric information and they ask for all of this information about you. In fact, if you go to set up a bank account and the bankers ask you all these questions, oh, what do you like? What are your hobbies and all this other stuff? They're not doing it to be friendly. It's actually part of a requirement for reporting for the know your customer anti-money laundering laws that started in 1970 with the Bank Secrecy Act. Now, it was started in 1970 to stop organized crime. I don't know if anybody's bothered to look back at how well that's going, but it's not going very well.
Maybe it's really not meant to go that well either. I mean,
no. The only people that have been punished are the consumers, law-abiding citizens. It's added massive compliance cost in the tunes of tens of billions of dollars a year, and they catch almost no money laundering or terrorism. In fact, I think the rate is like less than 0.5%. So it's been a complete failure. But when 9/11 happened, they passed the Patriot Act, and then they've added more and more and more surveillance. So now all of that surveillance is going to apply to these stable coins. The other thing is the stablecoin issuers are going to have to provide audits every month to the Federal Reserve. But this is the real reason that they're doing it. The real reason they're doing it is that they're requiring that these stable coins must be backed 1-to-1 by only U.S. Treasuries and only U.S. dollars. And so, meaning that if you're Tether and you have $150 billion worth of stable coins, but you're backing it up by gold and Bitcoin, you now have to sell that gold, you need to sell that Bitcoin, and you have to buy treasuries, or otherwise you will not be in compliance. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because, as our Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said, we're going to be able to sell $2 trillion worth of treasuries right away based on this stablecoin legislation. They're doing it to fund the expansion of the government through stablecoin hype.
By actually extorting it from private enterprise, like
from private enterprise,
making it impossible for them to do business without this purchase.
Yes, and this happens a lot with government. This is why, come back to the earlier point about how we don't have a capitalist system, we have a crony system. What I suspect is going to end up happening is the four big banks, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and JP Morgan Chase have already announced that they're looking at working together to create a stable coin. But what I think is going to happen, because of the compliance costs and everything else, Tether is going to be forced to sell to them. So I think that what's going to happen is the two big players will end up being captured by the big banks, and then we're back to where we all started again, which is essentially a backdoor CBDC. So Now what we're doing is if Harris had won and tried to push a CBDC, it would take 10 years before she'd be able to get $27 trillion a year in transaction volume. They are backdooring this in a way that's going to immediately add financial surveillance and immediately continue to fund wars and everything that we have in our budget and U.S. tyranny around the world. So we have a backdoor CBDC that is much more, and as a result of that, by the way, there are 134 countries around the world looking at CBDCs, and they represent 98% of global GDP. So now they're seeing what the U.S. is doing, and they're saying, well, we need to accelerate our CBDC plans, or otherwise the U.S. is essentially going to control. They're going to, yes, maintain or increase global reserve currency status, and so they'll control the global digital surveillance coin. So if you're in another country, you don't want the U.S. government to be the one that has control over digital money. So now the EU has announced that as early as October of this year, they may roll out the digital euro CBDC. And other countries are accelerating this. So now there's an arms race globally for rolling out digital surveillance cash. And that's the consequence of this Stable Genius Act. So when I say technocracy is flourishing, digital ID, AI surveillance through Palantir, and a backdoor CBDC. Again, Harris couldn't do this in 2 terms. What's happened already in 6 months. And it's not Trump doing it. It's the fact that Trump is essentially being pushed and controlled by really Peter Thiel driving this more than anything else. But I happen to think that what's going on with Musk is actually, this may have been planned all along, what's going on.
What do you mean, what's going on specifically? The America Party or whatever he's doing?
With the America Party, because you remember he wore this dark MAGA hat, and the dark MAGA is a reference to Curtis Yarvin and Curtis Yarvin's philosophy. So this whole thing might have been he was, taking advantage of Trump's stage to actually start building prominence and to position himself for doing this. I don't think that this was a surprise, something that he just all of a sudden decided to do at the last minute. But let's look at what's happening here. So if we go into 2028, J.D. Vance is the likely frontrunner for the GOP. He's a technocrat. He's literally Peter Thiel's guy. And then there's going to be whatever Musk is doing. So in essence, technocracy's already won. So from a political perspective, 2/3 of and the Democrats are always pushing for centralization anyway. So the only difference with the Democrats is that they're incompetent at execution. But we don't have, all we have politically are different shades of technocracy, but there's nothing going on politically that is in opposition to technocracy, which is part of why my solution, when I ran for president, I had in my t-shirt it was very simple. It said, bank run now, halt CBDCs, stop World War III, end the Fed. The idea being if you exit using the dollar, those 3 things happen. That was the core of my message. I didn't ask anybody to vote for me. I asked for people to vote with their feet. I also said boycott public health, get your kids out of government schools, stop watching mainstream media, et cetera. And it's the same message. Again, you never had to vote for me, but we are definitely in that state now where people have to take back their free will and just say, I'm not going to ask for permission or forgiveness. I'm going to move my energy outside of this, fake manufactured war for who's going to control the global technocracy.
So, and I'm totally riveted by all of this because I think it's the central question of our age. And, it sounds like we might be too late. So the question is then, and it's always my question almost every day, given what we're facing, given what we're in, given how hard it is to discern like what's really going on, like when you talk about, well, I don't think this was just like an impromptu thing that Elon did. I feel like everything seems a little staged to me and that people are face jobs for a different agenda behind that. So all of that is happening. We have children, we have grandchildren. What do we do, to live a good life? And how do you stay in the material world? And I don't mean like materialism, but in the actual physical material world, out of the digital space. How are you able to transact privately, to enrich yourself spiritually and physically, and keep your family safe and close, and all of those good things that seem like they're being systematically stripped from us, or we're voluntarily giving up in the name of convenience and being on social media and all of those things. I guess I'm looking for some optimism. And I don't experience you at all as a pessimistic person. I think you're very realistic and you are providing solutions. So just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not pessimistic. I mean, I know usually it comes off, and if you read the first half,
I don't think it does actually. I think you're very realistic.
if you read the first half of my book, it's like, oh, this is horrible. If you don't read the second half, then you're going to walk away pretty
No,
demoralized.
I was reading the first part of it and I thought, I cannot read this before bed because it's so chilling, because it's so plausible.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, so again, to me, I don't know. I did a lot of fasting. I did 138-day fast, and then I just did a 40-day fast,
Wow.
which is a whole interesting thing in and of itself. But things come up, you can't help but be present when
you're in an altered state,
fast.
I'm sure.
Well, you're in an altered state, or you're in your normal state. I mean, you're actually present. You're actually conscious of what's going on. We are so distracted by external things, and our time is fractured and everything else. And maybe in a way you're more present. But I came to the conclusion probably 5 years ago that the real battleground here is for decentralization versus centralization, love versus fear, free will versus determinism, and abundance versus manufactured scarcity. So I look at the world as like those are really the big battlegrounds. And in essence, it's, to make it shorter, it's technocracy versus freedom, and it's literally free will itself that's on the line. So to me, having no fear in all of this is the important part of this. Is so many people are worried about losing what they have, but once you realize that in a technocracy, you're not going to have anything. You're not going to, when Klaus Schwab says you will own nothing and be happy, I will tell you, he means it. And I know exactly how they're going to do it, which relates to the solution side of this. The way they're going to do this is they're going to create digital tokens that represent not just money, because that's what a CBDC is or a stable coin is. It's a digital token that represents a dollar. They're going to use that same technology. They're already working on it for all of your other assets, your stocks, your bonds, your house, and everything else. And so everything you own is going to be able to be tracked, programmed, and censored. I've outlined it in articles that I've written for Brownstone. They're actually building this infrastructure. So I think the big challenge that people have is they assume that things are going to stay the way that they are, and then they have probably not a realistic understanding of how bad things currently are. But things are not
which is a little bit of a comfort, but not necessarily useful.
It's not necessarily useful, but you have to understand that the movement, what I just said about digital ID and backdoor CBDCs and everything else, that's happened. That's happened in 6 months, right? So the train's left the station. That is the default, is that we're moving towards that. So once you understand that the default is that we're all going to be in a digital prison, it makes it a lot easier for you to operate without fear, and to be willing to take risks and to say, oh, okay, well, my default is a digital prison. If my default's a digital prison, then how do I make sure I change my circumstance? Because that is the base case. The base case is this digital prison. And so then you start exiting. So you start I've been using privacy cryptocurrencies. So, we could talk a lot about cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin is not the solution. Bitcoin was actually hijacked by the deep state and people in traditional finance in 2017. And it's a tragic situation that people don't know that. So there are a lot of people that are going around thinking that Bitcoin is the answer. Bitcoin was supposed to be a currency that you use that is separate from governments and separate from banks. And it was supposed to be used for day-to-day transactions. And I won't go into detail, but you can read a book. You can see it behind me, Hijacking Bitcoin, written by Roger Ver, who outlines exactly what happened, who was involved. But essentially, it's now digital surveillance gold. All of your Bitcoin transactions can be tracked. In fact, it's easier to track your Bitcoin transactions than it is your bank transactions, because at least after 7 years, the bank gets rid of your transaction information. All of your Bitcoin transaction history is available forever, with thousands of copies of it all over the world. And so Bitcoin isn't the answer. And so the answer to digital surveillance is privacy. So what I have been using and trying to build and support are projects that are privacy protecting. So cryptocurrencies that the government can't go in and look at what your transactions are, even if they wanted to, even if they issued a subpoena, they can't. It's not there. It's cryptographically protected. And equally, when we talk about this UN agenda system where they're going to tokenize everything, where you'll have water credits, you'll have education credits, you'll have carbon credits, and everything will be centrally programmed and tracked. There's a parallel version of that where everything is tokenized in a way that's private, where you can tokenize and trade any asset, and this can be done without the need for third parties and without the ability for third parties to see what's going on. So to me, that is the front line for how we do this. I'll give you one example. One project that was this blockchain that I like is called Zano, and it allows you to create these privacy tokens. And one of the applications is something called the Freedom Dollar, or FUSD. It is a stable coin, but it's different than Tether. It's different than USDC. And that, first of all, it's private. So there's no Bank Secrecy Act that they actually literally couldn't enforce that at all. They can't see the transactions. They can't freeze the transactions. But it's also not backed by the dollar. So you're not funding the state and the wars and everything that the government's going to do with the trillions of dollars of treasuries that they sell to back these things. And so it's backed by over-collateralized Zano. I won't go into all the details of it, but this is a very interesting project. So now you get the benefits of being able to price things still in dollars, and you get low fees and the ability to do transactions anywhere in the world globally, but you don't have any of the tyranny that's being imposed by the Genius and Stable Acts. That's just one thing.
Let me ask a question about that, though. So if you have Zano currency or Zano coins, if that's the correct terminology. So let's say I buy some of that and I have it. Who takes that kind of thing? Like, can I go and purchase gas with it or a carpet with it? Like, how does that work?
So there are two things. So in building this parallel structure, there's building marketplaces and building alternative solutions, which is where we need to go, probably starting with healthcare services and food to kind of get the basics down. But one of the things that I do living on crypto is I can buy gift cards with crypto, or I can buy debit cards with crypto. So there's there's a phase here. So the way I like to look at it is there's a tyranny index and then there's a freedom index. The tyranny index is if the bad guys win, we have one global digital currency that's an energy credit system, and it's tied into the complete AI surveillance state, and it's the end of free will. On the other end, on the freedom index, everybody's using privacy coins and privacy tokens, which are digital currency that you have in your own possession. It's not held at a bank or any third party, and it's not being controlled or issued in any way, shape, or form by a government.
It's almost like bartering with cash. I mean, it's like you have a private transaction between you and the person you're transacting with, which is how that's what we did growing up.
Yeah,
it's a very old-fashioned concept.
That's what people did before 1970. That's what the dollar was actually prior to the 1970. And so this shouldn't even be controversial, right? What are we talking about here? We're talking about enabling people to be able to engage in voluntary interactions. This shouldn't be something that people are looking at a lifetime in prison for, but nevertheless, here we are. But so anyway, this idea of where everybody's using that, but there's an intermediate step, just like the technocrats haven't fully gotten to this energy credit system. There are intermediate steps where right now, maybe you have to buy gift cards, maybe you need to buy debit cards. But again, I'm pushing in a big way for marketplaces, and I'm pushing food freedom and medical freedom in particular to start taking this and to start building ecosystems where people are starting to pay themselves using these currencies and work outside of it entirely. But it's going to go in phases, but we do need to accelerate this at a rapid pace. And this technology, Zano, while it was developed 6 years ago, it really didn't reach the point where it was technologically mature enough to be used until the last 6 or 7 months. So I'm very excited about that. I mean, I think this is really there is hope. There are technologies, but it requires. So one of the things that my wife and I have been doing is we've been going around the country doing workshops, teaching people, getting people set up with wallets, and teaching people how to use this. I've taken a few months off waiting for some of the technology to get to another place where we're going to be able to do workshops where not only are people going to be able to set up a crypto wallet, but we're going to be able to set up merchants so that they can accept crypto. So the whole point of it is that at the end of a workshop, somebody that's newly onboarded to crypto can buy something directly from a merchant that's newly onboarded to crypto, because making that first transaction and getting that done is a huge milestone. And then also teaching people how to create businesses, because we need to create parallel systems to what the UN is doing, and so that there are actually an infinite number of business opportunities. Essentially, think about it as you're reinventing everything that exists in the centralized world. So for instance, the way the stock market is completely rigged, multiple third parties, unless you can pay $50,000 in legal fees and all of this other stuff, you can't even really participate. You could create a complete alternative stock market with privacy tokens representing shares where, imagine you walk down the street and you buy $50 worth of your favorite restaurant shares, and you can create those kinds of alternative systems. So literally everything that exists in the centralized world can be recreated in the decentralized privacy space. But when I say this, the important thing to understand about this is Walmart and Costco are not going to be ever signing up to use these privacy coins. This is actually about creating an alternative system,
Right.
not about trying to take this technology and work within the existing system, because the existing system has no incentive for this.
They're disincentivized completely to do it. I mean, imagine what would happen to them.
Exactly. So they're trying to carve up their piece of the technocracy, because Walmart and all these companies are part of the, I don't know if Walmart is, but most of these large companies are part of the WEF. They're pushing, when things like ESG and everything come up, they're pushing it because they're front running. They're getting involved early. They know they're going to own a disproportionate share of the new system when it gets rolled out. And the people that are going to be disadvantaged are us and just the overwhelming majority of the population. And so in some respects, people would say, well, it's a risk to do this. But once you understand that the default is this digital prison, it's actually not a risk at all. So it's just, to me, understanding risk is understanding that the default situation that we're in is a negative one. And so therefore you actually have to, once you really internalize that, then you have to take action towards these alternative systems. You're not going to just sit and wait for the bad things to happen. But my biggest challenge is, I was at Chris Martinson's event last year speaking, and I'm going again this year, but he did this really interesting thing where he asked people a whole bunch of questions and then had them line up based on what they thought the percentage probability was. And so he's like standing on this deck, and I think they may have had a drone or something. And so they're taking a picture of what looks like a human bar graph that shows where people line up based on the percentage probabilities of these things.
Oh, fun.
But the thing is, the majority of people thought, well, Trump won't do a CBDC, Trump won't do this, Trump won't do this. And because people still don't filter through and look at what a bill name says and then what's in the bill. So there are a lot of people that actually think, well, we're not going to have a CBDC. And they don't realize that what we're actually going to have is the complete hyper adoption of digital surveillance money backed by US Treasuries in a way that Biden or Harris couldn't do in a decade. And it's being cheered on because they're saying things like, well, it's American innovation and America's going to dominate crypto. Meanwhile, the people that were actually ahead of the curve that really pushed crypto, like Roger Ver, who was known as Bitcoin Jesus, he learned about it in 2010, gave away tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin to people, was the first investor in Bitcoin related companies, invested in the first point of sale systems for merchants, the first exchanges. He actually took out ads on the radio and I think billboards as well, promoting Bitcoin, even though it didn't benefit him personally, because he saw the potential of what it meant to spread freedom around the world and to stop the violence that central banks cause. And so the whole crypto ecosystem wouldn't exist. He left the United States in 2014. He expatriated. And when Biden passed his executive order, Roger's going to be the first person you target because he's the most effective person at promoting the actual use of cryptocurrency as an alternative, not something that you just invest and speculate in or that you buy through BlackRock. So now he's facing 109 years in prison. They've made up all these tax charges. The DOJ lied to the grand jury. The IRS sent armed IRS agents to his lawyer, violated his attorney-client privilege. They've done everything that they can, and he's now been well over a year in Spain awaiting extradition, where he faces 109 years. Well, Trump ran on, being pro-crypto, and when he won, he said, "Oh, the war on crypto is over." Well, the war on crypto is not over at all, because these people that were the first to promote all of this, Ian Freeman, who I talked about before, and Roger Ver, and this other guy, Roman Storm, who created a privacy technology called Tornado Cash, they're all still being prosecuted by the DOJ. There's been no relief at all. If you had a meme coin that was a Ponzi scheme, you're safe. But if you're somebody that actually was promoting freedom, and by the way, one commonality of all of these people, because I write about these people and I support these people very heavily, they all are pro-freedom and they all hired lawyers and got legal advice and opinion letters saying that what they were doing was legal. It's mind-boggling, and there's no relief from Trump at all, which leads me to believe that, again, there's more nefarious things going on here. I wish that wasn't the case.
Yeah, for me, I came to worry about all these freedom things through the vaccine mandates, right? I mean, I kind of knew things weren't as they appeared before that, but I really woke up during the COVID situation. And I've been watching the people who are freedom fighters during that administration now contorting themselves because they think that somebody or some team is coming to save them, working within the system. And it's tricky. You don't want to trample over something that might change something for the good for some people. And, you want to be supportive of good things. But I've been very disillusioned by people making allowances for things that under a different administration they'd be out in the streets shouting about. And that's what I think is the danger of thinking that one administration is going to be on your side, and so that you make allowances for them. And that's why when you say that Harris couldn't have done this, I think it's true because the right would have been in the streets. And it's just like the lockdowns. Trump was able to lock us down because if it had been Hillary, there would have been 10,000 long guns on the Capitol lawn. So it's just kind of depressing. And I think that what's interesting about your approach is that you're just saying, okay, all that's happening and it's going to happen. There's no amount of voting and protest that's going to change it. But here's how we can have a chance at living as humans and having free will and doing what we, wish. And one thing that was interesting to me is I was talking to a friend of mine when they were, remember they were arming the IRS, like 70,000, they were doing all this stuff. And I just said, well, that's really concerning. And my friend said, well, I think it's great. Because, I think it's great. I'm not worried about it. And I think, well, geez, when the administration changes and they don't like you, well, you think it's so great. And I just said, have you ever been audited? Do you know what a hell that is? Why would you wish that on anyone? It's a mindset of, it's personality over principles. And I'm just trying to get away from that. And I'm trying to keep up with what's happening, but not absorb it and wreck my life with it. And I see that that's how you're living. And that's what I was so interested in talking to you about. And also because I wanted to learn about the things that you know, because part of the reason I'm inviting people to talk to me is not because I think I have any expertise, but it's because I want to learn a lot of things and also to figure out this central question of how do I not waste my life being in the mud of what's happening that's totally beyond my control? And how do I protect myself and my family and hang on to my soul and my joy and not be forever down some horrible rabbit hole?
Yeah, well, no, I definitely appreciate that. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, this is part of the issue. I mean, and I will say, I'll just call it out. I have a lot of frustration with RFK. I mean, this was supposed to be about medical freedom. And the problem is that what he's doing is he's just, when you're substituting big pharma with Silicon Valley, that's not an upgrade. Just like it's, if you're replacing Raytheon with Palantir, that's also not an upgrade. The whole point to me of medical freedom is that medicine should be decentralized, should be outside of the state. And so in essence, what I think you're going to see happen over the next 4 years is the role of government in healthcare is going to increase based on the personal preferences of people that are, attached to the medical freedom movement. But that's not medical freedom. Medical freedom isn't using the apparatus of tyranny to push your view. And it'll only backfire because, again, you've increased the role of government. So the next time around, we're going to end up with something much worse. And it is tough. I gave a talk once at a Brownstone event. I said, we need America 1.0 is dead. We need America 2.0 from first principles. And it fell really flat. I mean, this is the time when everybody's like, oh, I think RFK is going to win the presidency. I'm like, do you understand? RFK didn't even know enough to understand that he couldn't even get the nomination of his own party. Then he actually thought he was going to have the ability to win as an independent. It wouldn't take a lot of analysis of understanding how the political system works to understand why that wouldn't happen.
Well, especially
but then we end up in a
DNC, yeah. Ugh.
Well, especially the DNC. So what do we end up with? We end up, to your point, we end up in a situation where people bought so far into the white knight strategy that we had Elon Musk saying that unless Trump wins, it's the end of Western civilization. We had people saying, well, Trump's got to be our guy, even though we've been complaining about Operation Warp Speed and $7.5 trillion worth of debt in one term, which is the most of any president. And then all of a sudden that guy's the white knight. And then Elon Musk is the white knight and RFK is the white knight. The white knight strategy never works. You have to be your own hero. You have to actually, we make 30,000 decisions a day. That's where the real power is in being able to control our own thoughts, our own actions, our own emotions. But it never works when you go with a white knight strategy. And boy, look at how epically it's failed. I mean, look at how bad things are compared to what the hope and promise was 6 months ago. We got Moderna, another vaccine for 6 to 12-month-olds was just approved. We have the Epstein thing. We have tariffs. We have this terrible budget. I mean, what happened? Doge was completely ineffective, and now there's that split. I mean, so all of the restore the republics, it's all gone. But there are a lot of people whose identities are now caught up in the fact that they bought into something. And I tried to point out, I was very explicit about why this wasn't going to work. And it's not a crystal ball. You can just look at the apparatus of government and then study what's happened with other large nation states or empire. Our situation, we're not different. In fact, we're doing things in some respects in a manner that is less effective. We're actually less effective than we're late stage Rome. Watch some of these congressional hearings now, and it's just it's like a WWE wrestling tournament.
That's what I feel like everything is. Well, and I think you don't even have to put it on to the federal level and say, the white knight strategy. Even in your own personal life, when you outsource your agency to just one other person and you say, well, I can't do this because I'm counting on them, or if you're always projecting power onto somebody else and not taking your own stance and not using your own agency, your life is out of control. And so groups of people are doing that on the huge stage, that they're putting all their hope and wishful thinking into these people that they think are going to represent them. And we don't have representative government at that level because it's too complex. And these people are so far removed from us. But I understand why people want to have that, because it's a magical thinking. It's comforting. It does feel good. I mean, I'm victim to it too. When something happens that's your team, it does feel good. And I'm always having to back off and say, wait a minute, right? Right is right, wrong is wrong, and it shouldn't matter who's doing something. And I'm not going to be on the team just because it's supposed to be my team. And that's been very disillusioning, but it's also been very liberating, because then it allows you to think for yourself and just to take everything as it comes and decide what is right for you and what you should do that's best for you and your family. And I would really like to have you come back on and talk specific strategies at some point if you're interested in doing it.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Yeah, I don't know what my audience is going to be. This is such a fledgling endeavor, but I'm hoping to cover a lot of different topics with interesting people who are experts like yourself, and just talk about a wide variety of things in the current situation, which I think is a huge mess. But I don't want to ruin my life because it's a huge mess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you could be happy in the fight, but again, to me, once you actually understand that the default is the digital prison, then it makes it a lot easier to take action. And sure. I think getting people, it's that aha moment, and then there's no fear. Because I've had people, I'll do workshops and people pray and they think that I'm going to be getting all this trouble and everything else. I'm like, there's no fear about it, because I know what happens if we don't try these other things.
Right.
And so, but it's hard to get people there. And I understand why. And this relates. I just did a podcast about this yesterday. I mean, part of what I'm doing is teaching people about technocracy, but the other part is teaching people about free will and how we've been programmed, programmed, from the time you're 0 to 7, you don't have any conscious filtering. So you get all of whatever you're told, that you internalize that, and that becomes
your operating system. Yeah, for sure.
And so then you have public education, and you have media, and you have all of these other forces. And so unless you realize that you're being programmed, you can't actually begin to take control of your own decisions. So you're either making your own decisions, or these external forces are, and the more people that we can make aware of that fact, the better. Because this is what becomes troubling about it. And this is one of the things that I don't want to do. I actually want to help. But if COVID hadn't happened, that's where I would have been spending my time. That's what my wife and I were doing actually before COVID hit, was, hey, maybe if we can raise consciousness, things could be better. And then what I realized is technocracy is actually a threat to free will itself. So if we actually don't stop technocracy, we actually will not have the ability to exercise free will. So now I'm trying to figure out how to balance both of these things at the same time. And it's tough because I think people have become certainly more programmed with the proliferation of technology, but then COVID hurt as well. I mean, COVID just made people that much more removed from society and interacting with people. I mean, it's to the point, even when I look at basic things like people don't even, it's not that people, I understand why I don't answer my phone either, but people don't answer the phone, but now people don't even respond to emails. You look at the response rate after COVID, people just don't respond to anything. People aren't engaged with anything. There's no interactivity. And now we're moving and shifting everything to wearables. And, and this is the issue. I'm not anti-technology, but when you look at what Musk says, I mean, his, ideal world is a world where it's kind of like that movie Wall-E, where it's just this hedonistic thing where no one has to worry about anything. But at the same time, there's no real exercising your free will.
No.
It's all about material comfort. That's the end result of technology. And you can get there from first principles thinking if your first principles are Newtonian physics and are based in materialistic science. Then that's where Musk goes.
Well, I think, in just one more comment on COVID, things have never gone back to what it was. I mean, people don't have dinner parties anymore. I find it in myself, you're just like, I don't really feel like going to that. People, and every relationship I had has been altered, with the rare exception of some long, close friendships. But my whole interaction with my in real life community was changed, and partly because I was so public about my stance, and it severed some relationships. So be it. But everything is different now. And I want to reclaim what used to be for my own self. And I think talking to people like you, it's really helpful to start, thinking, how can I do this? And also, how can I wake some people up to stop being so propagandized and start to just say, whoa, wait a minute. Is this my thought, or is this just somebody telling me I have to think this way? To see a little bit more clearly.
Well, to that point, it actually happens one person at a time. This is one thing that I try to explain to people, being from a tech background, but it's also the same with ideas and political movements. I remember I was at an event, G. Edward Griffin event, and he was talking about something that he's working on, and the entire U.S. came about because it was actually 0.5% that then got 1%, that then got 3%, but it wasn't 50% plus one of the population. Well, this is how technology works. Technology goes through an adoption cycle, an adoption curve. You have innovators, then you have early adopters, then you have kind of early majority, and then eventually you get to the laggards. And a lot of people not understanding this want to skip steps or think to themselves, well, this isn't successful because it doesn't have immediate mainstream adoption. Nothing has immediate mainstream adoption. And the people that are at the end of the adoption curve, the laggards, those are the people that are that have given up the most of their agency and that are the most programmed on a day-to-day basis by outside parties. I heard, this is a separate whole thing, but I went to a couple of Joe Dispenza meditation retreats, and I've also read some of Bruce Lipton's work. And I guess by the time people are 35, between 95 and 99% of what you do the next day is exactly the same as the previous day, because you're that locked into habits and subconscious programming. And so, I mean, in essence, you could argue we become NPCs. It's not that we start that way or that we're in a simulation and some people that we interact with aren't conscious beings, but we do it to ourselves.
Yeah.
And, but it can all be undone. That's why there is an optimistic part about this. The good news is it can change in an instant. The minute people are aware they're programmed and are aware that they can take back their free will, that is a eureka moment. And that's possible for everyone. So that's why there's an optimism to all of this.
Well, thank you for that. And I love your metaphor about the early adopters and then the thing spreads. I mean, if something bad can happen like that, why not something good? And, on that note, I just will take that to the rest of my day and week and use it as part of my toolkit to navigate this crazy environment we're in. Before we break, I want to ask, tell people where they can find you, and then I'll put some links in the show notes when I do publish this. and we'll talk about what links you would like to have there. And I'd love to talk to you again, Aaron. And again, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you for having me. Love to come back. You can find me at daylightfreedom.org. That's my main site. You can also find me on X at Aaron R. Day. And then you can also find my articles at the Brownstone Institute. So you can go to brownstone.org and you search by author, and you can see everything that I've written there.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And let's talk again soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.